Hey YouTube, and welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge here on the internet. Alright, we're doing another top 10 video today. This one is 10 Ways World War II Could Have Ended Differently by the channel All-Time 10's. So I think this is maybe the second or so I've done from this channel. They've kind of done a bunch of lists, and I've noticed they've done a lot of history-related ones, so I think that's perfect for what we can do here. And these are kind of interesting. This is, I guess, a little bit more alternative history, which is a popular thing where you talk about how things could have been different than the actual outcomes in history. And those can be fun to kind of speculate on and drive up discussion. So let's see what they have. Obviously, I haven't seen this, and I'll give you my thoughts on things there. If you like this original video, make sure you go down to the description and head to the link so you can sub to All-Time 10's, which is awesome. If you haven't subbed to this channel, I'd love to have you as a subscriber and be a part of our community. So let's go ahead and get started. 10 ways World War II could have ended differently. See what we got.
Ten ways World War II could have ended differently. Number 10, Operation Unthinkable. As the following 5 decades showed, the Second World War didn't end on entirely comfortable terms between the Western powers and Russia.
Let me go back.
The Second World War didn't end on entirely comfortable terms between the Western powers and Russia.
Sure.
But in 1990,
the big three there, if you don't know, famous picture.
didn't end on entirely comfortable terms between the Western.
You got Winston Churchill on the left. You got FDR. Interesting about this, I believe this is at Yalta conference from this picture. One of the final meetings. Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought it was at Yalta from this specific photo. You'll notice on the right, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of America. He is not doing well health-wise. He will, at the top of my head, I want to say this was in February of 45, and around then, what I'm trying to get at is FDR will actually pass away within the next 3-4 months, and he's not actually looking very good health-wise there. And on the right, you're going to see, on the right here in a second, you'll see Stalin. So those are known as the big three. Winston Churchill from Great Britain, FDR from United States, and Joseph Stalin from Soviet Union.
Powers in Russia. But in 1998, we learned that Churchill had considered a more extreme plan for after the Yalta Conference to discuss Europe's post-war reorganization.
Right.
Scheduled for the 1st of July 1945, Churchill had conceived a plan for British, US, Polish and German forces to liberate Poland and East Germany from Stalin's communist encroachment into Europe.
Yeah, there was the big, at Yalta, basically what they said is the war was turning. I mean, the war had turned. The Allies are going to win. And one of the things that they feared of a little bit was twofold. One is they don't want Germany to be handled the same way it was after World War I, which caused this whole mess in general. Just kind of stick some sanctions on them and then let them, oversee themselves. They don't want this to happen again. So the Allies are going to directly oversee the post-war rebuilding of Germany. And this was even before Germany had been invaded by the Allies. It was still on the fringes there. Excuse me. And so what they decide to do, my dog just mimicked my cough, great job, is they are going to divide up Germany even beforehand and say, okay, this is how Germany is going to be overseen after the war. They're going to split it up into sectors, one by the Soviet Union, one by the Americans, the French, and then the British, and they would kind of divide that up. And behind the scenes too, what especially the Western allies are afraid of is of Joseph Stalin. Okay, Joseph Stalin right here, fearful that, because they don't trust him, that after the war he could seek to just kind of dominate over Germany. So try to draw these borders and these lines in early on to keep this from happening.
The idea was to get a square deal for Poland after it became clear that Stalin betrayed his promise for free elections. But it soon became a defensive plan once the Allies realized...
That was something Stalin had promised to do at Yalta too, is, all right, all those places we invaded, they're going to have free elections afterward, and they don't happen anywhere.
Taking on the mighty Russian bear was, to quote the National Archives, fanciful. In any case, if this operation actually went ahead, it could have gone one of two ways. Either the coalition forces took East Germany and Poland, leaving an awfully uncomfortable standoff with the USSR, or it would have failed, got messy, and caused World War III immediately after World War II. Come on, everyone knows to at least give it a year before the sequel. Number 9, Operation Sea Lion.
Okay, so here is your invasion of Britain by the Germans. Operation Sea Lion will be a failure, of course. The invasion doesn't end up happening. They don't get past the first bombing phase with the Blitz.
History buffs or Christopher Nolan fans will know that the UK was at a particularly low point after the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940. In fact, we were in such a sorry state that Hitler ordered Führer Directive 16, which stated, "The aim of this operation will be to eliminate the English homeland as a base for the prosecution of the war against Germany, and, if necessary, to occupy it."
If necessary, but it would be really nice to, right?
The operation in question was called Sea Lion, which involved a naval invasion followed by the capture of MPs, intellectuals, and outspoken enemies of the Reich. It was originally planned for just 8 weeks after Dunkirk. However, luckily that...
Yeah, because, I mean, with Dunkirk, that's when they basically drive the British out of the mainland Europe there at that time. And things are definitely in the favor of the Germans at this point in the war. So the next stage of potentially invading Britain was definitely something that was, the momentum was leading towards.
Never happened, since the Luftwaffe's defeat in the Battle of Britain stopped Germany from controlling the skies to support the invasion. As a result, the invasion was delayed again and again. Eventually, Sea Lion was abandoned in favor of Operation Barbarossa, which aimed to take Moscow and topple the Soviet Union.
So Operation Sea Lion fails, the invasion of Britain, and then they turn to the east after that. Operation Barbarossa is Hitler and the Germans going back on their non-aggression pact with Stalin and the Soviets and end up invading them, surprisingly. And, of course, that will also end in failure after some of the turning points at places like Stalingrad, where then the Nazis get repelled and close in on all angles.
Union.
And on all
that
sides.
disastrous campaign eventually cost Germany more than 4 million lives, around 80% of its total war losses.
Crazy.
So, who knows? If Hitler went with Sea Lion over Barbarossa, his war effort might have not ended quite so poorly.
Yeah, but Sea Lion wasn't going to be possible. It wasn't going to be possible. They couldn't get past even the first. I mean, they talk about how it's a naval invasion, but the first part is the bombing, right? The Blitzkrieg style warfare is you go in with air raids first, right? You bomb strategic centers, and part of the Blitz too was bombing population centers. So I mean, it could have ended differently, but it wasn't possible. It wasn't impossible. They couldn't get past the first phase because if you can't, you have to be able to land there. The Germans have to be able to have safe landing, and if you can't do that, if you can't bomb into submission because it's over water, right? You can't just roll in with tanks. You have to attack the coastline so they can actually have that invasion. So this is not a possibility for what I don't think they're saying here.
Number 8, no Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
It's not a controversial.
Great question. What happens? Does the United States join the war if Pearl Harbor doesn't happen? Was it a matter of time? I mean, a lot of different directions that could go for sure.
Controversial argument to say that Pearl Harbor was the major catalyst for US involvement in World War II. Before then, there was a significant anti-interventionist movement in the country.
Yeah.
But
World War I really upset, not upset Americans, but definitely left a bad taste in Americans' mouth that America should stay out of European conflicts. Europe is a mess, and don't get involved with it, obviously, unless you absolutely have to. So, yeah, early on in the war in America, it would have been a very unpopular opinion for general Americans to support joining this war because, again, how World War I was.
That largely dissipated in the face of Japanese aggression. That kind of galvanization is precisely the opposite of what Japan wanted. Naval Commander Isoroku Yamamoto believed it would bring American morale down to such an extent that it cannot be recovered, when in fact it made it obvious that
overestimation.
the war was unavoidable.
Yeah.
Even noted isolationist Charles Lindbergh said, "I can see nothing to do under these circumstances except fight."
Yeah. It had the exact opposite effect. Yamamoto is saying here. Yeah, the fence sitters were now got on the other side rather than entrench themselves further in isolationism. It completely brought people on the side of the fence for joining the war. It had exact opposite effect. I mean, it was just unanimous pretty much. And you could see it in the voting in Congress.
If I had been in Congress, I certainly would have voted for a declaration of war. But had Pearl Harbor not happened, there's a reasonable chance that the isolationists would have gotten their way, and the US either didn't enter the war or engaged in a reduced capacity. The reduced threat on the Western Front as a result may well have given Germany more resources to take on Stalin and maybe even win. Number 7.
I still don't know if Germany could have been as successful if they had taken care of all the West. If America had joined, and then with Britain, whatever, keeping them at bay, just fighting the Russians. Because even before like the Americans join up, the Russians had already turned the tide of the war. So I'm not really one that's full into that.
Operation Downfall. Dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was undoubtedly a defining factor in the war, not to mention in history. But it wasn't always the plan. Before the nuclear option was taken, Operation Downfall was Plan A. This would have been a traditional invasion, and the largest in history at that, which unsurprisingly would have taken a much greater toll on US forces than forcing the issue via nukes.
Sure. I mean, that's the popular thing, right? That use of atomic bombs was to avoid a land invasion, hopefully. But yeah, a lot of people don't know how extensive the bombing efforts were before the atomic bombs. The fire bombings in Tokyo and other sites were extremely devastating. A lot of people don't know that because it just gets overshadowed with the 2 atomic bombs.
In fact, it would have been so costly that many historians argue Truman dropped the bomb to avoid it.
Yeah.
According to his...
Probably, in the end, they thought it would save a lot of American lives, maybe even Japanese lives, because of what an invasion would have turned into, which is just would have been incredibly brutal, especially as evidenced by the battles that preceded it, places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where the basically it was death to the last person on the Japanese side, and was atrocious with the casualty counts.
Historical writer Michael Peck, the American invasion would likely have succeeded, but it could have added an extra 2 years to the war effort and cost as many as 1 million casualties.
Very likely. Very likely. That I don't think that number is out of reality.
That would have tripled America's total death toll. After that, the outcome is anyone's guess. Such a fatigued and war-torn US might have shied away from involving itself in world leadership for decades to come. It's even plausible that the memory of Operation Downfall would have kept America out of Vietnam. Number 6. Operation Valkyrie.
I believe this is the one if Hitler had been assassinated, if he had been killed at some point in his leadership, what that would have changed. Would have Nazi plans have continued on without him, or would they have died with him?
Succeeds. The failed plot to assassinate Hitler in 1944 has gone down as one of the great what-if moments.
Timing is interesting, like it's 44, you're 5 years into the war. I mean, a lot has happened, and the war is starting to not go as well anymore by this time. So that plot, but I mean, obviously, so it wouldn't have changed much. I mean, if it's on 44, the war didn't go on for much more than a year after that. So it's like, what would have changed now if this plot had happened long before, like back in the 30s or something? Then the scenario is vastly different.
It's in history. Having been so close yet so far from success, it's hard not to wonder what would have happened if the Führer's reign was cut short. Just for some context, Operation Valkyrie was a plan led by Klaus von Stauffenberg for the German Reserve Army to overthrow the Nazi regime. And the July 20th plot was the actual assassination attempt where a briefcase bomb happened to move and only injure Hitler. If all had gone to plan, it's tempting to think that it would have broken Hitler's vice grip on Germany and heralded the end of the conflict.
But it's 44. It's 1944. It's too late. It's way too late, if that's when it's going to be.
But that's probably wishful thinking. Since there was still very much a cult of personality around Hitler, we might have seen the assassination spun as martyrdom to rally the people.
Sure.
Or let's say, for example, that...
Yeah, I mean, that's something to think about. Would it have had the opposite effect of inspiring people? This late into the war, no, I don't think so. I think it's too late. It's too late for it to have that kind of effect.
Himmler, head of the SS, became the new Führer. We know that he secretly attempted to broker peace with the Allies behind Hitler's back in the real world. So with Adolf gone so early, we might have seen a less tortuously slow Nazi defeat. Number 5. Hokushin Run. In the years preceding World War II, right up to Pearl Harbor, Imperial Japan had 2 competing strategies in its military. There was Hokushin Ron, aka the Strike North faction. and Nanshinron, also known as the Strike South faction. The two opposing doctrines
I don't know
sought
this. I don't know much about this, so this is good. To see more of alternative scenarios on the Japanese side.
to expand north into Russia and China, or south into the Pacific and take on the Western powers. As we know, they chose the latter and felt the consequences. But what if Hokushin-ron won the day? It's hard to say for sure, of course, but if Hirohito took on Stalin, Siberia likely would have been a prime target. We can somewhat safely assume
No, not Siberia. No.
Japan would have fared well against the Siberian defences, since its forces hadn't been worn down to nearly the extent of the other major powers. That could have had a cascade effect on the Eastern Front with Germany. If Stalin had to divert forces to fight Japan, or if the Siberian reinforcements on the Eastern Front weren't available, Hitler's Operation Barbarossa could have drastically shifted the war effort in his favour. Number 4. Nazi nukes.
All right, yeah, people talk about that. The Nazis had developed atomic weapons. Would they have used them? Where would they have been used, if anything? Would it be more on like somewhere like Moscow, or try to restart the war or the offensive against the British and use it on like London or a place like that? I mean, there's a lot of scenarios there, but a lot of conjecture. Let's see what they say.
Historians are split over whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki was actually the move that ended the war.
Sure.
But you could argue that if someone less restrained, say a fascist expansionist leader, had access to nuclear technology, their continued use could have brought the Allies to their knees. That's especially true considering how vulnerable London was to German V-2 bombers. Now, imagine if they were nukes. That said, there are a few big reasons that didn't happen. For one thing, German military science was heavily focused on Hitler's so-called superweapons, like the
the Nazis were way into science for sure. I mean, scientific experimentation. But I believe Hitler, even in the very last, honestly, days of his life, thought that some kind of super weapon was going to present itself and be able to be a big change to the war, even down to his final days, they say. We'll see if they talk about it, but one thing that people talk about is that the Nazis basically purged all the high-ranking Jewish scientists, which, again, were a lot of them on the cutting edge of atomic theory. And of course, you know, it's famous when you get to the United States, where some of those scientists, their work will be appreciated.
The outlandishly large V3 cannon and the Sun gun, most of which turned out to be a waste of money and manpower.
Wah, wah.
On top of that, the politicization of education under the Nazi regime led to an exodus of mathematicians and scientists, making progress much slower than it could have been.
Like Einstein over there, guys with some of those histories like Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer, they've become very influential into America's study of atomic theory.
And lastly, the theoretical physics that formed the basis of nuclear tech was considered Jewish science by the Nazi Party. Good. So it wasn't given the attention it should have had.
Glad they said that.
Number 3, Hitler takes Russia.
Could have ended differently. Hitler actually takes Russia. But I think people are all pretty sure that was not possible. Would not have been possible, even with the decisions that they made. Even like diverting, like, okay, they don't go after Stalingrad and actually put more into Moscow and stuff like that. A lot of people don't think necessarily that would have done it either.
Operation Barbarossa was pretty much make or break for Germany. Just imagine the sheer amount of resources that went into marching on the Eastern Front in 1941.
Well, and remember that was a major reason for it. You have the Lebensraum idea for living space for population of the Third Reich of Germans. But also, more importantly, would be the Soviet Union's access to natural resources like oil, which the Nazis were running out of, was a huge motivation. And one of the reasons they diverted to the southwest of the Soviet Union around Stalingrad and the Black Sea kind of areas, Caspian Sea areas, for the oil-rich lands there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a lot of ways, they say that invading Russia was necessary if they were going to go further than what they had, because they would have run out of resources anyways.
Getting within 20 kilometers of Moscow and then being pushed back to Berlin and eventually defeated in 1945. But what would happen if Germany succeeded in Russia? Well, in a book titled Unmaking the West, Historian Holger H. Herwig suggests the easiest way was if Stalin left Moscow for his second home called Kuntsevo-Daka, which he very nearly did in real life. Herwig suggested that if fail-safe explosives inside Kuntsevo were triggered and killed Stalin, the Soviet organizational structure would crumble. Then he postulates that the leftover Soviet leadership would cut a deal to give Hitler all of European Russia.
I mean, I obviously have to know. I don't know much about specific positions that leaders under Stalin had about that thing, about what they felt about the war thus far, if they felt that they wouldn't win so they could cut a deal. I honestly don't know enough about that. You can help me with that if you know. But I mean, everything is always a what if, but is it in the realm of possibility that these deals would be cut if Stalin dies? I just honestly don't know enough about it. I don't know. I would lean towards no, but I don't know. Convince me.
That the leftover Soviet leadership would cut a deal to give Hitler all of European Russia. With such an extreme resource boost...
I don't know. I mean, they didn't have it very long because Stalin invaded that stuff. When Hitler invaded into Russia, you know, the Russians counterattack and move and take in all those territories, and they get absorbed in the Soviet Union. But that deal though was made before with Stalin with the non-aggression pact. They were already going to split Poland and let the Nazis were going to allow or whatever be fine with the Soviets coming in all the way into taking Eastern Poland and the territories of outside of that. Remember in World War I, how much territory was taken away from Russia after the war, even though they had fought on the Allied side. They pull out and got tons of territory taken away because of the old self-determination idea that those regions that were part of the Russian Empire before the rise of the Soviet Union would be able to gain their independence, which they did, and the Soviet Union under Stalin wanted to take that stuff. So one thing to think about, I guess, if they talk about if Stalin was killed, the next in leadership, would they have held that same position of trying to keep a hold of those states as part of the Soviet Empire? Are they willing to give up on that and just focus on the Russia itself and not the Soviet states in the West?
Hitler would likely have the manpower and equipment to take Western Europe pretty convincingly. But here's the twist. Herwig reckoned that nuclear weaponry would still hand America victory. So, in this reality, with Russia, Germany and the UK pacified, America would emerge as the only world power. Number 2, Spanish involvement. Back in the real world, Spanish dictator Francisco...
Yeah, okay, so this is definitely something that people talk to me about in class, that Hitler and Francisco Franco had this relationship, and Hitler helped Franco, who was a fascist, win the Civil War. The Spanish helped him win out this, or fight, in the Spanish Civil War, which a lot of people consider like a dress rehearsal of World War II. And so naturally, it seems like they would have been allies, but of course weren't able to have that kind of relationship there because they were fighting that off.
So Franco never entered the war in any official capacity, though he was friendly enough with Hitler to send a division to fight on the Eastern Front. But what if Franco followed through on his promise to join the Tripartite Pact with Germany, Italy and Japan? Would it have tipped the balance in the West? Probably not, as it turns out. You see, Spain had been economically decimated by its civil war, with 10 to 15%.
Okay, so yeah, Spain could have been an ally, but they couldn't be because of the effects here. They had so much to do on their side that they never would have been able to help the Nazis anyways, even if they wanted to with more efforts. That would have required a different scenario for the Spanish Civil War. Even though the fascist kind of government wins, would have needed to be able to have that and recover from it quicker than they did.
What actually made Spain somewhat of a liability to the Axis powers,
since
it would have required substantial aid to get involved. So Grimsley theorised that the most likely outcome would be that once the Allies liberated Italy, Spain would see the writing on the wall and surrender, with Franco replaced by monarchy once again. So admittedly not the most wild change, but it would have meant around 40 years less fascism for Spain. Number 1, D-Day fails.
Okay, yeah, this is a good one. D-Day fails. The Allies, I've said this repeatedly in a bunch of my videos, the Allies were not totally convinced that D-Day would work. They had plans and even drafted statements, it wasn't president yet. Eisenhower had drafted for if the invasion had actually failed, which was very much in the realm of possibility.
D-Day tops most war enthusiasts' lists of important battles in World War II, so it probably makes sense to examine why the outcome was so crucial. Let's say the effort fails. What on earth would have happened? It's pretty likely that the failure would have spelled the end of FDR's presidency, whether because he chose not to run again or because he was defeated by an isolationist candidate.
Okay.
World War II is often touted as the springboard to America's global dominance, so turning away from the world at such a crucial juncture could have massively altered the global order. And across the Atlantic...
Well, if D-Day fails, America doesn't go in to the rest of the war and spend all this money, of course. They still would have been an economic power because they already were. And that was America's big leap was had already started from the end of World War I as being one of the nations that was able to recover, obviously, because the lack of involvement for the most part for the Americans. I mean, what World War II did was make America a superpower by default because of how incredibly devastating World War II was economically to recover from everybody involved. So yeah, I mean, America still would have been a big power, an enormous power, one of the top couple powers in the world, no matter what.
It's likely the burden fell on Russia to beat back the Nazis completely. If Stalin did emerge victorious, his real-world post-war actions proved his eagerness to expand the USSR. That means wherever else Russia liberated in this timeline would have become a Soviet satellite state. So whether communism or fascism won that bout, it's pretty likely that Europe would have fallen under authoritarian rule. Good job we won, right? So that was 10 ways World War II could have ended differently. Can you think of any other alternative timelines? Let us know in the comments below.
Yes.
And if you enjoyed this video, check out 10 Unsolved Mysteries of World War I, which is on screen now.
Cool. All right. Get a conversation going in their chat. You can do it on our chat or whatever too. What are some other potential ways World War II could have ended? I've done a if you're into this stuff, especially like what ifs from World War II, definitely check out look at some of the videos I've done from like Alternate History Hub and stuff like that if you want to see some of my thoughts on some of these theories. They're interesting to talk about and usually get a good rise. But yeah, if you have any other ideas too of what of some other scenarios or ways that the war could have ended, yeah, definitely get it going and share those opinions. Great forum to do that is on Discord or in the YouTube comments if people will be there. But you can join our Discord community if you'd like to get a little more feedback that way. Again, if you like this original video and you haven't subbed over to All Time 10's, definitely do that. They do a great job and doing a lot of historically themed lists, and these are fun to talk about, so I'll definitely try to get to more of those. Love to have you as a sub too, and thanks for subbing, liking the videos, and being a part of our community. All right, we'll go ahead and see you next time. Bye.